Okay, great and glorious, Nick Dutch here yet again. Again, going through excerpts from this Wikipedia article and discussing them with reference to the supernatural, the occult, social and psychological sciences as well. This article is about natural science methodology, and hopefully we can start building a cohesive picture as to what could be useful and or important when investigating supernatural phenomena from a scientific point of view without any of the religious stuff which has been thrown in with the passage of time. Okay, now it says here, new theories sometimes arise upon realizing that certain terms had not previously been sufficiently clearly defined, which is, you know, terms not being sufficiently defined is unfortunately rife in the New Age and the occult world, because there's different theological points of view, and all these theological points of view get in the way because they're theological points of view. And we've got to somehow find ways of getting rid of that belief aspects, and just trying to focus on what has actually happened in a particular setting. And then we can start working out what caused it and expand upon our knowledge. For example, Albert Einstein's first paper on relativity begins by defining simultaneity and the means of determining length. These ideas were skipped over by Isaac Newton with, "I do not define time, space, place, and motion as being well known to all." Einstein's paper then demonstrates that they, viz. Absolute time and length independent of motion, were approximations. Francis Crick cautions us that when characterizing a subject, however, it can be premature to define something when it remains ill understood. Naturally, we're talking about stuff in the New Age world, in the occult world, in the magical world, which are ill understood. So we're always going to come across some problems. And those are just challenges to be overcome, basically. But yes, we are going to come across problems. In Crick's study of consciousness, he actually found it easier to study awareness in the visual system rather than to study free will, for example. His cautionary example was with the gene. The gene was much more poorly understood before Watson and Crick's pioneering discovery of the structure of DNA. It would have been counterproductive to spend much time on a definition of the gene before then. So as we progress in knowledge, we can then start to come to better understandings of what's actually going on. And that's the same in all disciplines and all schools of thought, including this one, all right? A hypothesis is a suggested explanation of phenomenon, or alternatively a reasoned proposal suggesting a possible correlation between or among a set of phenomena. And that's important to understand. As it was mentioned in another YouTube video, within science you move from the points of view of a hypothesis first. You can then test something to see whether something happens, then you can then say, okay, well this thing seems to happen. So you can then create a theory. So the hypothesis comes first. So it's a suggested explanation, which you then experiment into to see whether there is any validity to the hypothesis. Normally hypotheses have the form of mathematical models sometimes, but not always. They can also be formulated as existential statements stating that some particular instance of the phenomenon being studied has some characteristic and causal explanations which have the general form of universal statements stating that every instance of the phenomena has a particular characteristic. I'm not sure if that's as easy to say when we're talking about things of a apparently supernatural nature. But if we could say that a person in a particular state of body and mind will experience certain things, then yes, that could possibly be the case. Scientists are free to use whatever resources they have, their own creativity, ideas from other fields, induction, Bayesian interference, and so on, to imagine possible explanations for the phenomena under study. Charles Sanders Peirce, borrowing a page from Aristotle, Prior Analytics, described the incipient stages of inquiry investigated by the irritation of doubt to venture a possible guess as abductive reasoning. The history of science is filled with stories of scientists claiming a flash of inspiration or a hunch which then motivated them to look for evidence to support or refute their idea. Michael Polanyi made such creativity the centerpiece of his discussion of methodology. So yes, you can use inspiration, you can use creativity, but again, that's essentially still to do with the way in which you're approaching the understanding of the world. It's not because you've had a flash of inspiration that that flash of inspiration is true. Okay, conspiracy theorists? Right. Once predictions are made, they can be tested by experiments. If test results contradict predictions, then the hypotheses are called into question. Now let's stop right there just for a minute. Yes, it's important to make predictions, but also if we're dealing with very complex and chaotic phenomena such as the human body and the human mind, states of consciousness and the rest of that, we can only test within certain remits. My point of view is that the state of mind that you're in when you're doing your experiments can dramatically affect the results. Because, you know, like with a dowsing experiment, just by example, okay, I'm not saying that dowsing is either real or not real. I'm just saying if a figurative dowsing experiment would probably work a lot better if the dowser was in the right state of mind and brainwave frequencies for dowsing, so that the ideomotor effect, which would then move the fingers of the hand holding the pendulum to make the pendulum move in a circle clockwise to indicate that something had happened, could actually occur. Now, if that dowser was not in the right state of mind, then it probably would not occur. So you'd have to make sure that your dowser, your figurative dowser, is in the right state of mind first. So if there is failure, it could actually be that the state of mind was not appropriate for a dowsing experiment, first and foremost. So you can't say that because the dowser did not detect where the keys to his flat are, using his pendulum, that the hypothesis is completely and utterly incorrect, because we're dealing with something very complex. Sometimes experiments are conducted incorrectly and are at fault, which is my point with the illustration I've given with the dowsing experiment. If the results confirm the predictions, then the hypotheses are considered likely to be correct, but might still be wrong, which is also important. Now again, if we stop right there, if you have your figurative proverbial dowser, and he's dangling his pendulum, and let's say the pendulum does move in the clockwise direction at the right moment when he does suddenly realize where his keys are or whatever, does that necessarily mean to say he has actually subconsciously picked up where his keys were? No, it could be there was a draft that pushed the pendulum and all kinds of other things making it happen. So you can't say that a correct result every single time or during any particular experiment necessarily proves your hypothesis 100% correct. So you have to analyze all of the phenomena occurring during that particular time before you can actually jump to a conclusion relating to the hypothesis in question. This would be my stance all along. Okay, the sentence goes on, and are subject to further testing. The experimental control is a technique for dealing with observational error. So again, you need to criticize your own beliefs, your own results, and everything that's happened. This technique uses a contrast between multiple samples or observations under differing conditions to see what varies or what remains the same. We vary the conditions for each measurement to help isolate what has changed. Mills' canons can help figure out what the important factor is. Factor analysis is one technique for discovering the important factor in an effect. And that's also been my point of view with the occult all along. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. We'll come back to it shortly, and I'll speak again soon, yeah?